Hello everyone. In today's video, we will be working on creating a deployment object declarative way. So, in one of the previous video, we have learned that how to start the deployment with a pod using the imperative way. But imperative way is not a practical way to work with the Kubernetes because when we create any Kubernetes objects, there are so many components we need to add. For example, when we are working with the pod, we need to add when we need to add image with the pod, resource with the pod, volumes that is been attached with the pod, all the things that we need. And when we create this information imperative way, it is very difficult to manage. So that is why Kubernetes provide a way to create a manifest file. So manifest file is a YAML file that defines all the requirement that we need for creating a particular object. So I will be using the same applications that I have used for the previous example. Here, I this also is available onto the GitHub under the cup of Java Tech. So you can definitely can download this, and I will put the link below into the description. I already have created a deployment file, but for our understanding, let us create a new deployment file. So deployment.yaml. So the Kubernetes manifest file should be YAML file. The name can be anything, but the extension should be the YAML file. So this is my deployment file. Now we will start adding the different component for the deployment object. The first item into the deployment object should be the app API version. So API version, and the latest API version you can find it from the Kubernetes documentation. So currently if I look at it, it is a API version app v1 for the deployment object. So we will be using the same over here, but time to times as the active development is going on with the Kubernetes, in the future it may change to some other version as well. The next line that we need to specify is kind, and there are different kind of objects we can create in the Kubernetes. Majority of them, like the common one is deployment, services, config map, volumes, all those things. So in our case, we want to create the deployment. So we will give a name deployment, and we have to be careful that in a deployment that D has to be capital. And if you don't give a D as a capital, it will give the syntax error. Okay. Next, we can specify a metadata about our deployment objects. And similarly, for other objects also, we can specify the metadata for the objects. So in our case, we are saying metadata, and then we have to indent two line here, and we can give some name to the our objects. So let us give a name iron fist, and it is a deployment object, so we are giving the name as a deployment. Then we also can specify some kind of label with the deployment objects. So and these labels are not mandatory. If you want to specify, you can specify, and this can be any key value pair, and it doesn't matter that you give the name as a iron fist and the app or something or anything. So let us give some name iron fist and deploy. You also can specify some more label 2 and some value label 2 value, or anything that you want to define the name as, And these labels will be used when we want to search the objects, when we are defining these objects in a using the kubectl, right? We can search this all the objects with the names we are defining. So for the bare minimum deployment object, this much metadata information should be good enough. Now let us go into the specification. So next tag, it's at the same level as metadata and kind and API version. We have to say define the specs, and this is very important objects where we will be defining everything that we want this deployment object to do. One of the first object that we can do is replicas. So how many replicas we want to create for the deployment objects? And in our case, we are okay with one, but we can specify more than one, more higher number as well. Then there is a selector that we need to choose. Selector, and we will come to the selector later. So let us just keep it simple, that let us see what are the things are coming for the selectors, and we will come to that later. uh, let us keep it blank for now, and then we define the template. The template is something where we will be creating a template which defines that what all the things that we want for these objects to be created. For example, how many containers to be added in this deployment objects, each container, what are the image it will be using, and what are the environment of objects that it will be using in this. All those details that we can specify inside the template. And template should be same indented as a selector and replica set. Then we have to indent to space here, and then we can specify a metadata for this template. The metadata that we specified for the deployment is different than metadata that we specify for the specification. Here also we can give some labels and here we can give some labels, and here also we can give any name that we want. For example, in this case we want to give the name iron fist only. Okay, so this is the deployment object, so we give the name as a iron fist deploy, and for the template we just give the name as iron fist. Then inside again a same label as the specification, as a metadata for the template, we again specify the spec here. These specs will be including details about the containers that we want to start with the with the deployment of. And this spec detail is all about the pod that we want to start. So again, we go inside and indent two space further, and we say containers. So all the containers that you want to define inside the specifications. And now these containers are a list of objects, so we have to define like that. And in the Kubernetes, in the YAML files, any objects is a list, we have to specify with the dash, and then after we specify everything inside the dash for that particular object. So we can have a multiple objects. So let's say I have got a name for my, I want to give the name for my pod. So I will give the same name as iron fist that I have defined for the app label. That should be fine, but you can definitely specify some different name as well. Then for the container, where will be my image be pulled? For example, in my case, it is cup of Java tech, and then iron fist and version 1. So this is the image that we have pulled, and we have pushed that image into the my Docker Hub repository. Then we can specify a image pooling policy. So what I want to do is there can be a multiple image pooling, a different image pooling policy, and in my case I want to always pull the latest image. So I will say pull always. It can be the other value can be if pull if not exist or some other values, and you can check those values into the Kubernetes documentation and reference guide. Okay. Another thing that we can specify for this image is the ports. And what is the port that we have defined? And we can define the multiple port. In our case, if you look at the YAM property files, the port for us is 8081, right? So we will also use the same port. So the container port, and I will give the value as a 8081. So now this information is going to be used when we are starting the pod. So this is the bare minimum things we needed. And if you go back and check that the documentations, they are also providing only this much information. And once you do provide this much information about our pod, we should be able to start our deployment objects. And this deployment object will have only one pod in our case. If you want to add another pod, we should be able to add another pod. As I was telling you earlier, right? I want to have more pods. For example, I have another application as well, Red Hood. So I can also Red Hood, and also I can provide, and then also I can provide whatever the port number it has. But we don't want to add this for our deployment. I want to keep it simple so that we can demonstrate it further. So this is all we needed for creating our deployment objects. Then once it has been created, how to start this deployment object. But before that, let us try to compare what we had done when we were creating a deployment object using the imperative way. So if you remember, what we had done is we had used this command where kubectl create deployment, and we also gave the name similar to the one that we have given for our deployment object, and also we specified a image that which you want to use. Our deployment object manifest file, we can provide more information, and that is what I was trying to explain you earlier. When we are creating a object within imperative way, it is very difficult to specify more information. Here we can specify all the details that we need for the deployment object to run. Now let us look into the selector. The selector can be used with the help of the match labels, or it can be used with a match, sorry about that, match expressions. Okay, so there are two flavor of this one. If we specify the match label, whichever the label that we specified into the metadata, we have to specify the same name right here. So here we have to specify like this. And in case of the match expressions, there are different options available. So with the expressions, we have to specify three things: the key, then operator, operator, and then values, which are the values we need to use. So here the key can be the name that we want to use. Okay, then the operator can be, uh, you can specify any of these value, like in, not in, then exist, does not exist. So with name, for example, if we want to use in, so we can say that with in iron fist, or we can say anything that is matching with these values, all the values that is matching in any of these value, if it is matching, then you start this particular pod. So in our case we just want to make it more simple so that we can use, but you got the idea, right? You have to specify a multiple. It is like a regular expressions where you specify the name, also the operator, kind of a operator, in, not in, exist, does not exist, any of the operator we can use, and we can specify the value of the my label that we want to use. So any of the label that matches, if it is found inside the metadata, then this object will be picked up. So let us just remove this for now, because we just want to use a simple way to define this object. So metadata, a selector with a match label and the name of the label should be good enough for us. So this is all we need. Now I'll go inside this, and the way we can start is kubectl apply and then minus f, the it is for the file name. So in our case the file name is deployment, so we can specify this name and we can start our deployment object. So when we start, the object will be created. In our case, if we try to get the deployment, then we should be able to kubectl and get. So now one deployment has been started with the name Iron Fist deploy. We also can get the pods as well, right? So here also the only one replica set we had decided to give here. That is why only one deployment object got started. Now we are able to successfully start our deployment object, and also the pod that we have defined inside that one, it is also been started. If we want to delete the deployment, so we can say kubectl apply minus f, not apply but minus f, and the YAML file name. So what it will do is kubectl. So what it will do is it will delete the deployment that we had defined. Sorry about that. I am keep on making this mistake. So now it is deleted. So for starting it, we have to say apply, and for deleting we have to say delete, and then give the file name with the minus f, and that will help us to start or stop the deployment object. So this is how we can create the deployment manifest file, and we can start the deployment object, and all the pods that we define inside the deployment object will be started. So thank you very much for watching this video, and in the next video we will be discussing about the service object.